Hi, I'm Chris from Development. In part one of this video, we looked at how to put together a simple server-side API and how we call it from the client. And we're going to expand on that a little bit and go ahead and show how to integrate server modules into the API. So what we're going to do is we're just going to use the basic server module, the data module, which is a really basic interface for the Mongo. One of the reasons you may want to use a server-side API is to utilize some of the more detailed aspects of Mongo and MySQL. The only thing that you can access through the client side without writing any code is just the data module. If you wanted to utilize the full method set of Mongo, then you need to create a server-side API to do that, as well as more complex MySQL queries. So we're going to use the data module just to store some data, and this is a little bit unnecessary because you can do this from the client side using the client module, the data side. But if you want to do some validation or perhaps do some more complex data handling, hitting a couple different data sources, etc., you would want to build it on the server side as an API module. So let's go ahead and we'll add a new endpoint here to our API, and this again is on the server side, and we'll just say add user, and we're going to pass the input table there. And in our add user, the input we're going to send up will be, let's go ahead and do name. Actually, I will show a little bit how you can just pass the actual object itself directly to the data module, which is kind of cool. So we're going to do add user, and so down here, let's go ahead and update our call here. Now we are here in the Corona project, so I'm going to go ahead and add this endpoint here, and then we'll make a little data object, and we'll say name equals Sally and age equals 32, and then we can just go ahead and pass this object up as the values, and then our onResponse handler here. So up here we're going to be expecting this data object, which will be in the input there. So what we need to do first is get a reference to our data source we want to use, and this will be users, and then we'll do core.data, and we want users, I believe. Let's find out here and double check our API notes here. Yep, source name is what we want to pass, and that would be users. So at that point we have a data object here that we can utilize, and that's our users, and then we're going to go ahead and we want to save something to this. So when we do a save, we should get a document back here. Let me double check that again. So under save, we get the we do a save method, and then we're going to get an ID back when we do a save. So we're going to get ID and then the error, and we're going to say users.save, and then we're going to pass this input because that's the data we got, and then we want to check for an error. So if we don't get an ID, then we're going to just return an error back down to the client. But if everything's good, then we'll go ahead and just push the ID down directly. So once that's done, we can go ahead and push this back up to the server. So we're replacing that in our test project there. And then on our client side, we should be able to call this, and then in our event return, we should get the ID of the new record. So let's go ahead and see if that works. So you can see here our result is this ID, and this is the record that was just created that we just passed up the data for. And you can see what's kind of cool is that we can just pass that object directly and just push it right to this method, and then just return the ID back as is from here. It's a string value, which is a valid value to return. And then if we did have any problems, it's going to go ahead and push our error down in the error key on the client side. So now that we have that in place, we can go ahead and just do something. And again, you can do all this on the client side. This would be useful if you wanted to do a couple different queries, maybe do some cross-referencing, or you needed to do something more complex using the Mongo module or the MySQL module. So but this is just showing an example of how we can utilize these server-side modules in our code here. So for the get user, we're just going to say input, and then we'll pass up an ID in here. So let's go ahead and extract that. And you probably want to do some error handling here to make sure you have the right values. And then we want to get a reference to our users again. So let's do core.data users, and then we're going to do we want to get the document here. So let's say local doc error equals users, and we're going to get. And you can pass either a Mongo query or an ID here on the get. So we're just going to go ahead and pass our ID. And then we need to do a quick error check here. So if we don't get a document back, then let's go ahead and pass the error down. But if we do, let's just go ahead and return the doc. Because this is going to come back as a table, we can just pass it right back down to the client, because a table is a valid return value for an API call. So let's go ahead and push this up to the server, and then we can go ahead and update our call here. And we want to pass this value, which is ID. And then let's just go back over to the console here and just grab this ID from here. And then once we pass it up, we should, we don't really need this anymore. Once we pass it up, we should be able to get that value spit out here in this debug call. So let's go ahead and do that. And it went ahead and called the API endpoint, and it pulled back our record. And we have the age and name that we had set, and then it also stores the ID as _ID. So that's a little bit of a round trip there for the get user. And again, this you can do the two examples I just shown here. You can do those on the client side just using the data module. So that pretty much wraps that part up as far as how you utilize the API on the server side. One of the things I did mention was that you can actually change your project reference within your code if you wanted to reference a different project. And you would do that by using the core.use project. And then let's say we had a different project, you can put that here. And then once you make this call, any other API calls you make from that point on are going to be referencing this other project. So it can be kind of tricky, and in general I don't really recommend it, but in extreme cases where you need to do that, then you can call that. If you want to switch back to your test project, you need to make sure that you would switch back to use project test. Another way to do that is to actually use a method that's on the server side. You can find it under utilities, and it's called call API, and this will let you make a cross project call up on the server side. So if we were to do that, it would be here. We're back here on our server side code. Let's say we were doing this, and then we decided, hey, we needed to reference another project API for something else. Then we can do result, and then we can do the core. And this is directly on the core namespace, as all utilities are. And then we would give it the project name, and then whatever method we wanted to call on it, whatever get some, and then whatever value table we needed to pass to it. So, and this is basically would call this project. It's going to call this endpoint, which would be something similar to this, except get some, and then this table here is what becomes the input. And then you'll get the result here. It's very similar to how we get a result on the client side. All of the keys for the result, or whatever the result is, will be in this variable here. So that gives you a way to call the API or cross-reference another project. And usually it's better to do it on the server side than on the client, because the client you do have to make sure that you're switching back and forth, where in this case it's just going to call this project here specifically at that point in time. So that's how you do that. And I think that covers the most basics. Again, to really get down into this, you should go to the server modules documentation under API, and this will go through and kind of explain a little bit more in detail how it all works. So that's part 2 to server API, and have fun with that. Thanks for watching.